In May 1945, Kammler ordered the destruction of sensitive documents and the evacuation of key personnel. At the bottom was a familiar signature: Hans Kammler, SS Obergruppenführer. And then, silence. A strange silence, as if this man had faded out of the world in a single breath. For 78 years, Western and Soviet intelligence services searched for him for decades, still have not been able to say exactly where he went. But Kammler was not just another Nazi official running away while the Third Reich fell into ashes. He was the man who held some of Germany's most dangerous secrets. He oversaw the expansion of concentration camps such as Auschwitz. He had overall authority over the underground W2 production complex, where prisoners were forced to work under deadly conditions, where prisoners were worked to death building W2 rockets, and he later gained significant influence over the Me-262 jet fighter program, although he did not fully control it, Germany's last hope to win back the skies. He knew the locations of top-secret facilities, the technical details of weapons systems that Allied engineers were desperate to understand, and the names of scientists who could shape the post-war world. A man like that, both the Americans and the Soviets wanted him at any cost. Yet when investigation teams started looking for Kammler after the war, they found only fragments of stories, full of gaps and contradictions, as if some invisible hand had been busy erasing his trail. Only a few weeks after Germany surrendered, 3 different stories about his fate began to spread, like puzzle pieces that did not fit together. His driver, Kurt Proch, said that on May 9th, Kammler told him to stop the car on a quiet road in Bohemia, then sent him away and shot himself. Yet no body was ever found. Other people whispered that his own subordinates quietly executed him, afraid of being dragged down with an SS officer who carried so many secrets. And many decades later, declassified intelligence files suggested an even colder possibility. The Americans might have secretly captured Kammler, brought him into a branch of Operation Paperclip, and created the story that he died as the perfect smokescreen. 3 stories, 3 paths, all leading to the same point. Hans Kammler disappeared as if he had never existed. And to understand how he could vanish so completely, and why that disappearance might have been useful to more than one government, we must begin with the man himself, who he was, what he built, and why his knowledge made him someone worth protecting, or eliminating. August 26, 1901. In the Baltic port city of Stettin, part of the German Empire, Hans Friedrich Karl Franz Kammler was born into a world that valued order, discipline, and duty above nearly everything else. His father worked as a civil servant, a respectable position that placed the family firmly within the educated middle class, and young Hans grew up in a household where Prussian values were not suggested, but expected. These were the years when Kaiser Wilhelm II still ruled, when Germany was building a navy to challenge British supremacy, and when the empire seemed destined for greatness. The boy who would later command underground weapons factories studied mathematics and engineering with the methodical precision his father demanded, showing early aptitude for technical problems. The 1920s brought profound change. The Kaiser had fled, the empire had collapsed into defeat and revolution, and the new Weimar Republic struggled through economic chaos and political violence. During these unstable years, Kammler attended technical universities in Danzig and Munich, studying civil engineering with a focus on industrial construction rather than aesthetic architecture. He earned his doctorate with a dissertation on construction methods, demonstrating technical mastery that would later prove valuable to men who needed structures built quickly and efficiently, regardless of human cost. Like many young professionals watching their country humiliated by the Versailles Treaty and torn apart by street fighting between communists and nationalists, Kammler looked to political movements that promised stability and restored national pride. In 1931, 2 full years before Adolf Hitler would become Chancellor, Hans Kammler joined both the Nazi Party and the SS. He was 30 years old, credentialed, and he appears to have seen in the Nazi movement something that appealed to his technical mindset: promises of order, efficiency, and the restoration of German power through organization and total control. The SS, Heinrich Himmler's elite organization, attracted men who believed they represented a new aristocracy based not on birth but on ideology and competence. Kammler fit that self-image. He showed no interest in street demonstrations or political rallies. Associates from that period might later have described him as belonging to the movement's technocratic wing, the engineers and administrators who believed Germany's future rested on systems and ruthless efficiency rather than mere enthusiasm. His engineering credentials made him immediately valuable within the SS bureaucracy. By the mid-1930s, he had secured a position in the Reich Ministry of Aviation, working on construction projects for Hermann Göring's rapidly expanding Luftwaffe. He designed airfields and hangars, planned military facility expansions, and demonstrated a combination of administrative competence and political reliability that brought him to Heinrich Himmler's attention. Himmler, more than most Nazi leaders, valued what he called technical minds, men capable of transforming abstract orders from above into concrete results on the ground. A colleague who worked alongside Kammler during those years testified after the war that Kammler never appeared to question the purpose of any project, only its specifications and deadlines. Moral considerations, if he entertained them, never slowed his work. By 1940, Kammler had been transferred into the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office under Oswald Pohl, and there he took command of Amtsgruppe C, the department responsible for SS building projects across occupied Europe. His portfolio expanded to include barracks for troops, factories for armament production, and most notoriously, the construction and expansion of concentration camps. The relationship between Kammler and his superiors remained transactional. He delivered results, and in return he received protection from the bureaucratic infighting that paralyzed other officials. This independence allowed him to maneuver between SS leadership, Wehrmacht commanders, and private industrial firms with unusual freedom. He coordinated with major industrial firms, including Heinkel and Heinkel, which produced military aircraft. To those who observed him during this period, he appeared as someone who could deliver what others merely promised, a manager known for pushing projects forward through strict organization and forced labor, rather than through technical innovation projects possible by treating obstacles as technical problems rather than moral questions. By the early 1940s, as Germany's conquests stretched from the Atlantic coast to deep inside the Soviet Union, Kammler's responsibilities expanded into territory that would later mark him as one of the regime's most culpable figures. The concentration camps, initially established for political prisoners, were being transformed into something unprecedented in scale and purpose, and Kammler's engineering expertise was applied to making those transformations efficient and industrial. Under his direction, SS construction battalions expanded facilities at Auschwitz-Birkenau and Majdanek, focusing on increasing the camp's capacity to receive prisoners, conduct selections, and dispose of bodies, goals that were clearly described in technical and administrative planning documents. The camps required better rail connections to handle deportations from across occupied Europe. They needed larger barracks to hold arriving prisoners before selection. They needed facilities that could dispose of bodies at rates that matched the killing operations. These were the problems Kammler solved, approaching them with the same detachment he might have applied to designing a highway system or planning an industrial complex. In 1942, Kammler was closely involved in overseeing construction plans for Auschwitz-Birkenau from the SS Central Administration, and surviving documents show that he had detailed knowledge of the camp's expansion and its intended functions. He walked through the site, examined layouts, and discussed technical matters with construction supervisors and camp commandants. What he saw there left no room for claims of ignorance about the facility's purpose. His technical recommendations, documented in SS files recovered after the war, were implemented quickly, demonstrating both his influence within the organization and the regime's confidence in his judgment. The work involved civilian contractors who submitted competitive bids for SS construction projects. Companies such as Topf and Söhne supplied crematorium ovens for Auschwitz-Birkenau, working closely with SS construction officers, and these designs were developed within a system overseen by Kammler's department. These were businesses operating in the ordinary commercial manner, discussing delivery schedules and payment terms, except the products they delivered were designed for mass murder on an industrial scale. By 1942, Kammler held the rank of SS Brigade Führer, which was roughly equivalent to a brigadier general, and this rank reflected his growing authority within the SS construction and administrative system, and his authority extended well beyond construction oversight into broader industrial coordination. He controlled budgets, material allocations, and labor assignments for projects scattered across the occupied territories. An SS administrator who served under him during this period testified after the war that Kammler never appeared troubled by the nature of what he oversaw. He focused on timelines, resource management, and problem solving. To peers within the SS bureaucracy, he seemed to be someone who understood that in the Third Reich, efficiency and results mattered more than ethical considerations. This bureaucratic effectiveness, this capacity to turn ideology into functioning systems, made him indispensable to leadership that valued action over discussion. Late 1943 marked a turning point. British and American bombers were striking German cities and industrial centers with increasing frequency and accuracy. Factories that produced tanks, aircraft, and weapons were being systematically destroyed, and Hitler demanded a solution that would place vital production beyond the reach of enemy bombs. The solution was to move operations underground, deep into mountain tunnels where no bomb could reach. This required both extraordinary engineering capability and complete ruthlessness in execution. Kammler, with his proven record of completing difficult projects regardless of cost, was the obvious choice. In the days following the Allied bombing of Peenemünde in mid-August 1943, Kammler was ordered to organize the relocation of the V2 rocket production program to an underground site. The V2 was Germany's most advanced weapon, a liquid-fueled ballistic missile capable of striking London from launch sites hundreds of miles away, and Hitler believed it could force Britain to negotiate. The Peenemünde attack had killed scientists and destroyed facilities, and now the entire program needed to move to a location beyond Allied reach. Kammler selected the Harz Mountains in central Germany, where abandoned gypsum mine tunnels offered ready-made caverns that could be expanded into underground factory complexes. The site became known as Mittelwerk, and to provide the necessary labor force, Kammler established Mittelbaudora, a subcamp of Buchenwald. Prisoners arrived by the thousands, Soviet POWs, political prisoners, and Jews deemed fit for work, and they were immediately put to expanding the Kohnstein mine tunnels into what documents described as a labyrinth of assembly lines and storage chambers. Conditions inside those tunnels were brutal beyond description. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts in cold darkness, breathing air thick with rock dust. There were no sanitation facilities in the early months. Men slept on bare stone. Guards shot anyone who collapsed and could not rise quickly. An engineer who worked at the site testified years later at trial that the tunnels claimed lives at a rate that exceeded many battlefields, but production targets were consistently met. Kammler now reported directly to two of the Reich's most powerful figures, Heinrich Himmler, who controlled the SS and its network of camps and industries, and Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, who managed production targets for the entire war economy. While Speer specified how many rockets were needed each month, Kammler controlled the means, the labor, the facilities, the logistics. It was a division of responsibility that allowed both men to claim credit for successes while maintaining distance from the methods used. March 1944 brought further expansion of Kammler's authority with creation of the Jägerstab, or fighter staff, an emergency coordination body formed after Allied bombing devastated German aircraft plants. When raids threatened to halt production of fighters desperately needed to defend German skies, Kammler proposed the same solution implemented for the V2: move production underground. By late 1944, Kammler's influence had expanded across several major weapons programs, especially those moved underground, although responsibility for projects such as the Me-262 remained divided among multiple authorities. Hitler took personal notice. In meetings at the Reich Chancellery, according to accounts given by participants who survived the war, the Führer praised Kammler as one of few men still capable of delivering results that others called impossible. These were words reflecting both desperation and genuine dependence, spoken by a dictator watching his armies retreat on every front. In the final months of the war, around late March 1945, Kammler was appointed as a special plenipotentiary for jet aircraft, giving him emergency authority over Germany's remaining advanced aviation projects, giving him control over the Luftwaffe's remaining technological projects, with authority that rivaled even Hermann Göring's diminished position. In this role, Kammler coordinated not only weapons production, but the nightmare logistics of relocating technical staff, research facilities, and documentation as Allied forces advanced. According to Speer's post-war memoir, though such accounts must be viewed with appropriate skepticism, given Speer's efforts to distance himself from Nazi crimes, he feared Kammler might use the chaos of defeat to bargain with the Allies for personal survival, offering secrets and scientists in exchange for immunity. Whether Speer actually feared this or simply found it convenient to suggest after the war remains uncertain. But the observation was plausible. Kammler's success had made him powerful enough to be dangerous, not just to enemies, but to other Nazi leaders uncertain of his intentions. April 1945. The Third Reich was collapsing with shocking speed. Allied forces advanced from the west, capturing cities that surrendered after token resistance. Soviet armies drove toward Berlin from the east with fury born of 4 years of brutal warfare. German cities lay in ruins, populations starving, refugees clogging roads in desperate flight westward. Amid this chaos, Hans Kammler remained mobile, still exercising authority over advanced weapons programs and the scientists who built them, but his position had become untenable. Even within the SS, command structures had disintegrated. Kammler's subordinates were abandoning posts to save themselves. Records were being burned in courtyards across Germany as officials destroyed evidence. The secret factories and underground facilities Kammler had built were falling to Allied troops one after another, and the scientists and engineers under his nominal command were making their own survival plans. On the afternoon of the 1st of April 1945, according to surviving radio messages, Kammler ordered about 500 rocket engineers to be evacuated from the Nordhausen area to the Bavarian Alps, and by mid-April he was using an SS construction office in Munich as a contact point, while he moved constantly. From early April he was involved in moving key V2 engineers from the Harz region toward the Bavarian Alps, and surviving messages show that he still had authority connected to sites like Mittelwerk and the SS-run forced labor projects around Leitmeritz, even though the exact content of all his orders is not always clear. He organized transfers of scientists including Werner von Braun, who had designed the V2, and Walter Dornberger, the army general who had overseen the rocket program from its inception. Some historians examining this period have suggested, though direct evidence remains elusive, that Kammler might have been positioning himself less as a fugitive and more as someone preparing to negotiate, recognizing that his knowledge and the scientists under his control represented valuable currency in whatever world emerged from the Reich's collapse. Mid-April brought a series of contacts with senior rocket engineers. The best documented took place on the 22nd of April 1945 in the Bavarian town of Oberammergau, where later accounts say that Kammler met von Braun, Dornberger, and other Peenemünde veterans to talk about their future, and these witnesses suggested that everyone was quietly thinking about how to reach American lines instead of falling into Soviet hands. Witnesses who attended that meeting recalled in post-war interviews that Kammler appeared calm and pragmatic rather than desperate, someone calculating next moves with the same precision he had applied to engineering problems. One engineer who might have attended such meetings testified years later, though his account cannot be independently verified, that Kammler's manner suggested he was analyzing options rather than accepting defeat. Whether specific words were spoken, no transcript exists to confirm, but the substance is clear from subsequent events. The rocket scientists agreed to position themselves to surrender to American forces. After the Oberammergau meeting, Kammler's trail became uncertain. Various reports, none confirmed with certainty, suggested he traveled south toward Linz in Austria, possibly passing through Salzburg. After the Oberammergau period, Kammler's movements are still partly visible. On 28 April 1945, he moved with his staff to Ebensee in Austria, where they took over a former Mendelssohn family villa, and only after that point do the sources begin to break off and leave gaps. On 7th May 1945, British intelligence intercepted a radio message signed by Kammler and sent to the SS unit at the Leitmeritz camp, asking them to report when his staff arrived there, and this late signal has become one of the last clear traces of his name in the wartime record. Germany had begun surrender negotiations by then. Formal capitulation would be signed the next day. If that telegram was genuine, Kammler was alive and exercising command at least 2 days before official surrender. After that message, Hans Kammler vanished. As Allied investigators began compiling lists of Nazi officials for arrest and trial, Kammler's name appeared on multiple wanted lists. His signature had been found on documents connected to concentration camps, armaments, and the V2 program. But when American and British teams tried to locate him, they found only rumors and contradictions. The most persistent account came from Kurt Preuck, who had served as Kammler's driver, and Heinz Zeuner, who had worked as his aide. According to sworn statements that Preuck and Zeuner gave in the late 1940s and again in the 1950s and 1960s, they claimed that on about 9th May 1945, Kammler told Preuck to drive him north from Prague. At some point along a road in northern Bohemia, in territory rapidly filling with Soviet troops, Kammler reportedly told Preuck to stop. In a sworn statement later used by a Berlin court, Preuck claimed that Kammler sent him away and then walked off alone. Preuck stated he then heard a single gunshot. When Preuck allegedly returned, according to his account, he found Kammler dead from a pistol shot to the head. Preuck claimed he and Zeuner buried the body in a shallow grave somewhere nearby, though they could never identify the exact location. No grave was found, no body recovered, no physical evidence, not a pistol, not personal effects, not even a confirmed location was ever produced. Yet this version became the one German authorities accepted, partly because it was convenient, partly because in 1945's chaos, hundreds of thousands died in unmarked graves, and partly because closing Kammler's file allowed everyone to move forward. A second version suggested something darker. According to this account, which surfaced in intelligence reports and conversations among German prisoners, Kammler was shot not by his own hand but by subordinates. The theory held that junior officers or security detail members feared capture while traveling with such a high-ranking SS general. Anyone found in Kammler's company would face immediate arrest and likely execution or imprisonment. Some versions suggested these men wanted to prevent Kammler from surrendering secrets to Allies, fearing he might bargain for survival by betraying others. No witnesses came forward publicly. No one identified who pulled the trigger or where such a killing occurred. The story existed as rumor, plausible given the chaos and paranoia, but entirely unverifiable. The third version only became possible when long-sealed files began to appear in American and German archives. A denazification report written in 1949 by investigator Oscar Pack stated that U.S. Counterintelligence Corps officers had arrested Hans Kammler on the 9th of May 1945 at the Messerschmitt Works in Oberammergau, and that later reports of his suicide were contradicted by precise information from CIC about his capture and escape. Later research has found additional CIC documents showing that an SS general with Kammler's profile was questioned about underground factories and secret weapons in May 1945, and these records name Kammler directly instead of hiding him behind an anonymous label. Some historians now argue that this evidence makes it very likely that Kammler fell into American hands, even if what happened to him afterward is still unclear. Documents from the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime predecessor to the CIA, hinted that U.S. forces might have detained Kammler in May or June 1945. These documents, fragmentary and heavily redacted even after declassification, mentioned an unnamed SS general with detailed knowledge of German secret weapons who was transported to interrogation centers in Bavaria during summer 1945. Intelligence officers conducting debriefings referred in reports to a high-value prisoner possessing information about underground facilities, rocket production, and advanced aircraft. Some researchers examining these documents have suggested the unnamed figure could have been Kammler, and that the suicide story was fabricated to obscure American cooperation with an indefensible figure. For German authorities after the war, especially the Berlin-Charlottenburg District Court that declared him dead in 1948, closing Kammler's case was administratively convenient because it turned a missing high-ranking SS officer into a finished legal file in a country full of displaced people and uncounted dead. Germany that spring and summer was a nation of displaced people, refugees, prisoners, corpses. Millions could not be accounted for. In that context, one missing SS general seemed almost insignificant, especially if his secrets had been extracted and his usefulness exhausted. September 1948 brought official closure when Berlin-Charlottenburg District Court declared Hans Kammler dead as of May 9, 1945. The ruling relied primarily on affidavits from Preuck and Züner. The court accepted testimony without requiring physical proof, no body, no gravesite, no official verification. It was legal closure rather than historical resolution, a way of resolving an administrative problem rather than answering a historical question. In months following surrender, Kammler's name appeared repeatedly in Allied intelligence files, his whereabouts becoming the subject of intensive investigation. American and British officers knew exactly who he was and why finding him mattered. His signature appeared on construction orders for camps, production schedules for the W2, documents related to underground factories. He had overseen projects combining cutting-edge weapons technology with slave labor on industrial scale. Yet despite knowledge and concentrated effort, every lead ended in uncertainty. In November 1945, George MacDonald served as an intelligence leader within headquarters U-SAFE, A2, and he oversaw efforts to collect German weapons knowledge and to question key prisoners, and he also asked him to personally interrogate Albert Speer, Hans Kammler, and Karl Otto Sauer about what they knew. Reports reaching MacDonald's office suggested Kammler might already be in American custody, detained quietly during the war's chaotic final days. A separate British intelligence note from the same period referred to Dr. Hans Kammler, SS General, believed to hold detailed knowledge of V2 production in the Harz region. Despite these efforts and devoted resources, no confirmed arrest or interrogation record has surfaced in declassified archives. If forces captured him, documentation was either destroyed or remains classified more than 75 years later. In 2019, Frank Döbert and Rainer Karlsch published a Wilson Center working paper, and they suggested, based on documents and indirect clues, that Kammler may have ended up in U.S. custody. but they also noted that key records remain missing or not declassified. The researchers pointed to circumstantial evidence. During summer 1945, according to intelligence reports they examined, several U.S. officers at interrogation centers in southern Germany mentioned in correspondence an unnamed SS general with detailed knowledge of German secret weapons. This figure was described as providing information about underground facilities and weapons program organization. The prisoner was reportedly flown between interrogation sites, suggesting multiple agencies wanted access to his knowledge. Karlsch and Dobert contended this unnamed figure could plausibly have been Kammler. They argued the suicide story, convenient for German and American authorities, might have been fabricated to obscure U.S. cooperation with a former SS general whose record made him a war criminal by any standard. In early Cold War years, when Soviet competition became American policy's driving force, German technical knowledge's value outweighed concerns about Nazi backgrounds. If Kammler could provide information helping the United States develop rocket technology or understand German research into advanced aircraft, his past might have been overlooked for future strategic advantage. Skeptics counter that no hard evidence supports the capture theory. No interrogation transcripts bearing his name exist, no photographs of him in custody surfaced, no fingerprints or physical evidence confirms presence at any U.S. facility. Critics point to Cold War mythology's tendency to inflate fragmentary evidence into conspiracy theories, merging rumor scraps, misplaced documents, and genuine post-war secrecy into unverifiable legends. Many mainstream historians examining the question have concluded Kammler's disappearance simply reflected 1945's chaos. One researcher observed that a man with many enemies and little protection after SS command collapsed likely perished in the war's final days, either by his own hand or others. Trying to escape through territory controlled by vengeful Soviet troops would have been extraordinarily dangerous for any SS officer. Yet absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In Kammler's case, the vacuum of definitive facts has proven irresistible to speculation. The uncomfortable truth is, we will likely never know with absolute certainty what happened in those final days of April and early May 1945. Kammler's fate matters not just as historical puzzle, but as window into post-war period's moral compromises. Understanding why his disappearance remains unresolved requires understanding the context shaped by early Cold War and decisions made about which former enemies could prove useful. Operation Paperclip was real, documented, and far more extensive than Americans realized for decades. Operation Paperclip was a real U.S. program that began in 1945, and it officially ended in 1947, but similar efforts continued into the early 1960s, and estimates commonly range from about 1,500 to more than 1,600 German specialists, engineers, and technicians, many active Nazi Party members, some with SS positions. These men were brought to America, sometimes given new identities, and put to work on military projects from rocket development to chemical weapons to aviation. The most famous was Wernher von Braun, whose V-2 rockets caused mass civilian casualties, and estimates often cite about 2,754 people killed in London by V-2 attacks, while many more were injured, and whose Mittelwerk facilities worked thousands to death. Yet von Braun became America's space program face, celebrated in magazines and television, his Nazi past quietly scrubbed until historians decades later examined declassified documents. If Americans recruited von Braun despite his record, despite slave labor oversight, despite SS membership, why not Kammler? Kammler knew things von Braun did not. He knew underground facility locations that might contain prototype weapons or technical documents. He knew organizational structure of Germany's secret weapons programs and could identify which scientists worked on which projects. He knew production methods, supply chains, military-industrial planning integration. In early Cold War's competitive intelligence environment, Such knowledge was extraordinarily valuable. If US forces captured Kammler and hid that fact, multiple reasons for secrecy become apparent. First, harboring the man responsible for concentration camp expansion and working thousands to death would have been a public relations disaster. Nuremberg trials were demonstrating Allied commitment to justice and accountability. Allowing a key figure to escape trial while claiming to pursue justice would undermine the entire process. Second, serious legal complications existed. Several Allied nations declared intention to prosecute war criminals, and Kammler would have been among highest value targets. Quietly employing him would violate international agreements and domestic laws. Third, political embarrassment loomed. Cooperating with a high-ranking SS officer, especially one whose signature appeared on camp documents, would be difficult to defend publicly or within government. Easier to declare him dead, accept unverified testimony, move on. Whether Kammler died in Bohemia by his own hand, was executed by subordinates, or vanished into Allied intelligence, one point is clear. No publicly available, declassified custody or interrogation record has confirmed Kammler's fate, and that gap is why the story remains disputed. His disappearance left a void that myth and speculation filled for 7 decades. 78 years have passed since Hans Kammler was last seen in the historical record. For many years, 3 main possibilities were discussed: suicide in Bohemia, execution by his own men, or capture by American forces. New documents now make American custody the most likely scenario, while the suicide stories look more and more like later inventions, yet we still do not have complete proof of what happened to him in the end. The Bohemia suicide, based on driver and aide testimony, remains convenient but unverified by physical evidence. The subordinate execution theory is plausible given the paranoia and violence of the war's final days, but lacks documentation from willing witnesses. The American custody scenario is now backed by several declassified intelligence documents that list Kammler as a prisoner held for questioning, even though we still lack detailed interrogation transcripts, photographs, or any record that explains how and when his story ended. What we know with certainty is limited but significant. Kammler built and expanded instruments of mass murder, the camps where millions died. He controlled Germany's most advanced weapons programs during the war's final years. For a long time, historians thought that the last solid sign of Kammler's existence was a radio message from early May 1945, possibly the signal sent to Leitmeritz on May 7th. Newly released American Air Force and intelligence records, however, show that he was still alive later that month and was being held as a prisoner for further questioning. He never faced trial. He never testified at Nuremberg or any war crimes proceeding. His body was never recovered. His fate was never officially verified. His disappearance's significance extends beyond his individual case. It raises uncomfortable questions about how many other officials escaped justice in 1945's chaos, how many were protected or employed by Allied powers valuing their knowledge, and where the line should be drawn between historical necessity and moral compromise. These touch fundamental issues about justice, accountability, and choices made by democratic governments confronted with strategically valuable but morally compromised individuals. Multiple nations' archives still hold secrets related to the immediate post-war period. Documents remain classified, some because they touch intelligence methods governments still consider sensitive, others perhaps because they contain information about cooperation with former Nazi officials that would be embarrassing or legally problematic if made public. Perhaps one day, as more files are declassified, a definitive answer will emerge. Perhaps interrogation records will surface, or a photograph will be discovered, or testimony will be declassified, proving beyond doubt what happened. Until that day, if it ever comes, Hans Kammler remains what he became in May 1945. A ghost in history's machinery, present in effect, absent in fact, forever elusive in memory. The engineer who built so much had ensured, whether by design or circumstance, that his greatest achievement would be his own disappearance. He vanished so completely that even now, nearly 8 decades later, we can only say for sure that he survived the Third Reich's final days and fell into American hands, but we still do not know whether he later died in secret custody, was handed over to another power, or managed to disappear under a new identity. The question of Kammler's final fate is still unanswered, and it may remain that way, a mystery that tells us as much about the choices made by the victorious powers in using and hiding former Nazi experts as it does about the man who disappeared. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into history's unsolved mysteries and the figures who shaped our world. New videos every week exploring the shadows where history meets legend.